Hi guys, I would like to introduce you to the Xbox mod called Dynavision Dynamic Depth of Field. That's right, I managed to successfully port this mod across to the Xbox console. Now for those of you that don't actually know what depth of field is an effect that, well, basically blurs things you are not looking at and clears up things you are looking at. You've probably seen it 1,000 times playing this game. For example, when you open your Pip-Boy, did you notice how everything blurred out? The background is now blurred and you're focusing on the Pip-Boy itself, and again clears up like so. It also happens when you aim with your weapon. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed, but if you get close to an object, if you look at the lamppost, I know it's got a terrible texture before people complain about it, but look at it, it is at least sharp in focus. When you aim with the pistol, you'll see it gets slightly blurry. Well, more blurry than the texture allows. And the same actually happens for your character. If you look at my character now, let's get some sunlight on him. You could do with a tan. And then I aim off into the distance. Do you notice how he gets a little fuzzy? A little out of focus? That is the game's depth of field. And what Dynavision does is it allows you to add a depth of field blur whilst you're playing to the background objects, and to even have that depth of field vary depending on what you're looking at. Now, it comes set to off. When you first install the mod, you will not see any changes. However, if you go into your Pip-Boy, you will find a holotape called Settings Dynavision, and if you load that up, you will be able to activate the mod. And to start off, I'm going to activate a long-range static depth of field. Now, the static depth of field is simply a depth of field that never changes. It is set to the distant terrain. When I close the Pip-Boy now, you can see immediately that pylon over there is very blurred. All of the distant terrain is now very obscured. It's quite a strong blur on the Xbox by default. That is because the Xbox uses something called bokeh DOF, and I'm probably saying that very, very badly, and I do apologise for mangling that word. You can change the strength of the depth of field. Under main strength, for example, I'm going to set it to the weakest, 10%, which is still reasonably strong for this depth of field. But there you go. You now have a lot more of a subtle blur. The pylon is easier to see, but a bit softer. This, of course, makes the foreground objects a little more, well, front and centre. And you have options for short range and mid-range depth of field. It's pretty much the same thing, except it brings the distance at which the blur starts closer to you. So I've set the short range one. You will see now that the water tower is a little blurred as well. So it brings that effect closer to you. But of course, the more interesting features for this mod are the dynamic depth of field settings. These are the settings that allow you to vary the depth of field depending on what you are looking at. I'll show you that right now. I'm going to change the blur strength back to 50% so you can see the effect. Again, you can choose whatever strength you want. You can have it really blurred or slightly blurred. I'm going to go for 50%, and I'm going to switch, not the main strength, excuse me. I'm going to switch the type under activate, deactivate. I'm going to switch this to dynamic light. This is a type of depth of field I pretty much came up with specifically for the console. It will work on PC as well. If I leave that. When I now look at this sign, if you look in the background, you can see the Nuka-Cola sign is blurred. It is blurred, as are the bushes there. If I move aside and look at that sign, you will see it comes into focus. So when I look at a close object, such as this sign, the background starts to blur. You can see the trees are now blurred, but as I move aside and look at the trees, they come into focus. This is a kind of pseudo dynamic depth of field. I'm calling it pseudo because in actual fact the focus never moves. All that happens is the strength of the focus increases. So as I'm looking off into distance, it will weaken and I get no blur. As I get close to something that I'm looking at, it will start to blur the background more and more. The closer I get, the closer I look at something, the more the background blurs. However, you can see things like the turret there was still fairly focused. The bushes in the background are not. And Strong got sharper in focus as he got closer. Do the same if you see it's now cleared up, I go and look at the turret and you can see that it is blurred. This works in first person and in third person. So for example, if you want to look at your character, it will blur the background. You can see the sign in the background is blurred, the trees are blurred, and of course the rocket is slightly blurred. The effect stops if you aim. When you aim, the game has its own depth of field that blurs closer objects and makes distant objects sharp. So if I look now, you'll see the background is now completely clear, and if anything, the foreground is slightly blurred. That's the game doing that itself. But of course this happens no matter what I'm looking at. There you go, nice and clear. There are options to speed the focus up under focus speed and of course to slow it down. Be warned, the effect only responds once the mod has detected that you're looking at something new, and once it detects it, then it starts to change. So there could well be a delay, and this is a bigger delay on consoles than it ever was on PC, which makes the faster settings, in my opinion, less attractive. The slower settings in this case are actually better. So if I change it to, let's just change it to 1, there is an even slower setting. The effect kicks in far slower and far more naturally, and I find it looks a little nicer. I think it's a more pleasant effect on the console, but you've got control over that. If you want the very, very sharp focus, you can have that. There are also options to change the strength in different circumstances. That's the strength of the blur. You can have a totally different strength in interiors to exteriors if you so wish. I generally have it set a little weaker, but that is completely up to you. You can also set it so that the effect is weaker whilst in combat, for example. It by default is 40% weaker when in combat, or even when running. Running is when you're just moving at normal speed, and you can change that to be much weaker or even off. So you'll see now, if I get onto the road, and if I look down at the road, you see the background is blurred. As I start running forward, you'll notice it stopped being blurred. As soon as I stop again, it kicks in. This will mean you can run around, do things, and see very, very clearly. And then when you stop, the focus effect will start to happen. So this is more if you like the effect when you're walking slowly around or looking at things, but when you're moving, scanning the horizon, you want the effect to be either off or a little weaker. I normally have it set to be a little weaker, not off. I've normally found that setting it to be about 0.7 or 0.8 is pretty good, or if you really want it noticeably weaker, 0.6. This will mean there is always a slight effect, but when you're moving, it will be less noticeable than when you stand still. I will show you the other setting, but it is one I don't recommend using on the Xbox. Now you might wonder why I left it there, and I left it because I thought some people might want to use it occasionally. So I have left it. I was thinking of disabling it. In fact, that was my original plan, but I'm leaving it. This is the dynamic full. What this will do is it doesn't just vary the strength of the depth of field, it actually varies the distance. If I get to this object now, it doesn't just blur the background, the distant terrain. The closer I get, you'll see it's also blurring the turret. So pretty much the entire background, except what I'm looking at, is blurred until I look away. This is a far better depth of field. I use the word better. It's more powerful, and of course, because it focuses closer and closer, you do get a more cinematic or photogenic feel to it. The reason I disabled this one is it really doesn't, not disabled, the reason I don't recommend this one and almost disabled it is it doesn't work very well with bokeh DOF, which is the type of depth of field this game uses. But can you see the tree next to me is completely blurred because I'm looking off into the distance. That is the sort of thing you get. You actually get blurred close objects if you're looking at far objects, and when you look at the close objects, the far objects blur. It's a far more impressive feature, but it just doesn't work very well. Not only is the performance fairly bad and slow, you will notice that image flick every now and again. It doesn't work very well. I do not like this setting, and generally I don't think most people will. I've left it there just in case you do want to use it. You might want to use it for things like screenshots, because when you go into third person and look at your character, it will have a much stronger effect. You can see much more of the background is blurred. So for certain screenshots that you want to take, this might be something you can use. So you use it like this, take a few screenshots, and then switch it back to the light one. And of course, there is an actual off setting. You can switch the mod off, and it will be as if the mod was not there. It will still leave the settings in the Pip-Boy, so you can change it back anytime you want, but now the effect is gone. I recommend doing this if you're going to stop using the mod. If you're going to stop using the mod, switch it off first, save your game, then remove the mod. Honestly, you probably don't have to. In fact, you almost certainly don't have to. It's just like one of those ultra safety precautions I generally recommend. One thing you should note about this effect on the Xbox is that when you apply depth of field on the Xbox, it switches off the in-game's transparency anti-aliasing. In fact, this actually happens not just for Xbox, but on the PC if you are using bokeh DOF. Again, apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly. And this is not something I can change, and I'll try and show you. If you look at these bushes, you may be able to see a very, very slight shimmer. This is probably really hard to see on a YouTube video. It's not actually all that easy to see, but it is there. If you're playing on an Xbox on a monitor and you're sat close to it, you might see it. If you're playing on a TV, you probably won't. But it is there. You can see it on things like hanging vines. What it is transparent objects with transparencies, which include most of the foliage, when they move, get what's called aliasing shimmer. And that is usually fixed with something called anti-aliasing, but when this game uses a depth of field of the type it's using right now, it switches that anti-aliasing off. There's nothing I can do about that. I am very, very sorry. This is why on PC I recommend switching the depth of field type to normal. Not only do I actually think it looks a little better in this game, it behaves much better. If the Xbox used the normal depth of field, you would be able to use all the features of Dynavision without hitch, and it would look a lot better. Unfortunately, they decided to use bokeh DOF. So, there you go. Not a lot I can do about that, and I do apologise. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Feel free to try the mod out and give me some feedback. And for those of you who are on PC and you're wondering whether or not this new type of dynamic depth of field, the light version, is coming to PC, the answer is yes. I will get it uploaded as soon as possible. So, there you go. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.